So tonight we're going to talk about stress. Is there anybody in here that has no stress in their life? Anybody? Anybody? That's good. That's good. If you had no stress, that would be bad. Is there anybody in here that has too much stress in their life? Well, that's not good. That could be a problem. So tonight we're going to talk about stress and how it affects us. And you probably already know that stress can affect your health. Did you know that? Yeah. So, it's one thing to know, like, you're supposed to eat this and do this type of exercise and do this and this and this. But when stress piles up, it's so easy for us to get derailed. And then we struggle. So, stress, stress is something that actually is not necessarily bad. It's more a matter of how much stress and how do you manage it. And so tonight we're going to talk about that. So if we're going to define stress, it's the things that put some kind of a strain on us, whether it's physical, emotional, spiritual, whatever. But does everybody kind of understand what I'm talking about when I say stress? We're really talking mostly about those sort of emotional things that happen, the pressures of life that build up. And so we're going to go through and talk about ways of managing this and how it affects our body. But before we do that, I want to take just a couple of minutes. There's a place here in your handout for you to list the biggest sources of stress in your life right now. Now, if you're sitting next to one of them, you might want to, put that in code language or something. I'm not pointing at anybody. I'm just saying. List of the 10 biggest stressors in your life right now. And if it's going to stress you out to come up with 10, don't bother with, But I'm sure when I say that, you have at least a few things that pop into your mind right at the beginning. So spend just a couple of minutes and think about what are the things in life that are causing you stress at this point. Okay? So I'll give you 2 minutes. All right. If you want to continue the list later, you can do that. But that should give you a little idea. Keep those things in mind as we're going through the rest of the presentation this evening. So stress, physiologically, we know it as a fight or flight response. That's basically stress. When you're walking down the street and a big dog comes running up growling and barking at you, you get a little adrenaline. What happens when you get adrenaline? Well, how does it affect your body? Your heart beats faster, your blood pressure goes up, normally you breathe faster, pupils dilate, your body also releases cortisol at the same time, blood sugar starts to go up, and all of those things happen almost instantaneously when you're in a situation like that, a fight or flight situation. And so if you're in that situation, you're going to prepare yourself, right? You're going to try to run to your car or into your house, or maybe if you're, like the last time that happened to me, I was out for a jog. And so I pulled out my pepper spray and my knife, and I sprayed the dog, and it ran away. Thankfully, I didn't have to use the knife, because that would have been not good for anybody. But I got that fight or flight response, right? Thankfully, the little pepper spray did its job. Nobody got hurt. Everything was fine. That's a normal physiology, right? And so that stress response is a good thing, because when you need to run for your life or fight for your life, you need your heart going faster, you need to breathe faster, your blood pressure needs to be higher, all of those things. Now, the problem comes about in a couple of different ways. One is that we live kind of so far removed from nature with civilization now that we end up having a fight or flight response in situations where fighting or running away doesn't actually solve the problem. Like when you go to the mailbox and you get something from the lawyer, or or something, a bill, or like what happened to my wife a couple of weeks ago, a notice from the bank saying your account's overdrawn. But it wasn't her account. It was a bank error. Yeah. So that whole day was stressful, but it all got sorted out. But would it help to go and fight the people at the bank? No, that wouldn't help. That would just create more stress. Would it help to run away and just pretend that didn't happen? Like, no, that doesn't help either. And so it is for so many of our situations now in life where, it's your boss yells at you because something happened and you got to blame somebody. Fighting the boss isn't going to fix that. And running away is not going to fix it either. So what do we do with this? We just kind of like stuff it down and, do what we have to do. So that's one problem with stress in our modern life. Our modern life is so complicated, and we're so far removed from the simple realities of fight or flight. But nonetheless, all of these stress hormones build up. And sometimes it's even things like our relationships with our friends, our family members, a wedding. I was just at a wedding. There were some people there that were stressed out. Have you ever been to a wedding? Have you noticed that it's stressful for a lot of the people? It's a good thing, right? We're happy. The wedding was good. We already talked about my new grandchild, right? That's a stressful event for everybody in the family. It's wonderful and it's good, but it's still a source of stress because now there's extra logistics and there's all this stuff that has to be done. So, in an acute episode, the dog running after you or giving birth to a child, like that's stressful. Well, it's stressful. It's physically stressful, right? And so you need a little extra adrenaline and cortisol to get through this first few months when you're sleepless and like take care of a baby. But this is exactly the problem. When that episode turns into a longer episode, then we go from that acute phase to the sort of reaction phase where like you're reacting, you're dealing with the situation, and then if it stretches out beyond that, now it's into what we call the chronic phase. And so this is where so many people live now, with chronic stress from so many different factors, job, finances, relationship problems, family problems, medical problems. I just talked to some people today who had to leave their home because of a domestic violence situation. And not only was there medical problems, but the home was trashed, and like now there's legal issues on top of all the other stuff, and it just snowballs. So it gets to be a lot. And that doesn't help us with our health, because when we have that sort of the cortisol level is up, you know what happens when your cortisol level is high? Cortisol stimulates fat to accumulate, your body to accumulate fat, and raises your blood sugar. Like, it does a lot of things that are not helpful for a long term. They're all good things when you're running for your life. But if you're under that stress chronically and you're not running for your life, then it starts to create worse and worse problems. So we have this graph here. I'm going to go through this graph, and then we're going to talk about a bunch of factors on how to help manage stress in a better way. So this is a typical bell curve, performance and stress. So when stress is zero, performance is also zero, right? And when stress is way too much, like, performance goes down. But there's this curve in between, just like a car. Like, most of it, everybody here has driven cars before, right? You can sit at idle and it's not very stressful, but you're not really getting anything done. But and you step on the gas, you start going faster. There's a curve here where the car is performing, it's going faster and faster. And then it gets to a point where if the stress on the engine gets too much, it starts to, well, it's probably more like this, right? When you throw a rod, then all of a sudden you're done. But in life, this is we can talk about this with weightlifting, right? If there's no weight, like if I'm doing this with, an ounce, like I'm not actually performing anything. It's not helping me to get better or stronger or faster. It's just going through the motions without any stress. Okay, on the other hand, if we put 1,000 pounds on that bar and any of us tried to lift it, what would be our performance? We'd be over on this side. There'd be no lifting, right? So somewhere in between is the sweet spot of maximal performance, okay? So everybody got that concept? Same thing in school. Same thing at a job, at work. You're trying to get stuff done. You can work harder and harder and get more and more done, but there gets to be a point where you're trying to do too many things at once and things start to slip. And then, you're missing things and your performance starts to go down. So anybody ever experience that in real life? Okay. It can happen. Now, I spent a lot of my life trying to find this spot right here. Peak performance, right? Medical school, 3 kids, and working a side job, remodeling a house, and maybe I'll start a business while I'm at it. I don't know, right? Or, you all have your own situations. You know what I'm talking about. Then what happens? What happens when you find this spot? Oh, here, before we do that, I'm just going to say, I'm going to break this down into like zones here. So, yeah, what happens when you're at this spot right here? Yeah. If anything changes, and guess what? Things always change. because the car breaks down, or the dishwasher breaks down, or you get a flat tire on the way to work, or you show up at work and there's like, something broke overnight, or somebody in the family dies and now you have a family emergency, or somebody decides to get married. And then what happens? You actually lose efficiency, you lose production, you lose performance because you're overly stressed. Now, what I have learned is that it seems like most people live over here or over here. I tried for a long time to be here, but I kept slipping over this way. And I found out it's better to be here. I mean, what's the difference between here and here? Performance-wise, it's not a big difference. But now, if something happens, my performance can increase a little bit. It's sort of like when you're driving a car, if you're going as fast as you can, and then something happens, you can't go faster. Does that make sense? So our goal here is twofold. One is to start managing our stress so we can move. If we're used to living here, we want to move up to here. If we're used to living anywhere here, we want to move back over to here. And then the second goal, just like our physical performance, when we exercise, we get stronger, we can actually change the shape of this curve. So our goal now is to try to make this curve more like this. And then, if it looks like that, then maybe I can live here. And now my performance is better than when I'm living here. And I still have a little reserve capacity here. Like this is a little bit flatter. I can optimally perform under a wider range of stress levels. Okay. So you see what we're talking about? So managing the stress and also improving ourselves and our ability to not only manage the stress, but to perform under stress. And some of these things will help in both categories at the same time. Okay? Any question about all of this? There's so much research on this in athletics, in business performance, in the military. It's just, we see this everywhere. And I've experienced it personally since I saw this and started paying attention in my own life. I was like, oh yeah, that's all real. I'm still learning because I still find myself ending up here a lot. And I need to keep that little bit of margin, which is one of our principles here. So, all right, as we go to the next page, on page 5, what determines how we react to stress? Well, lots of things. We already talked a little bit about our beliefs and this connection between our belief systems and how we make choices, right? What specific beliefs that affect stress? First one is locus of control. So this is a psychological term, and it just means who's in control of you? Is it you? Are you in control of yourself? Or are you at the mercy of circumstances? I have a friend who every single thing that happens in his life is because somebody else did something to him. That guy that sold me that car, he didn't tell me this happened, this and this and this. Or, I went over here and then the cops, they were harassing me and then this and this and this. Or I was traveling and then they gave me some bad food and blah, blah, blah. It's like every single conversation is a victim. And his locus of control is not inside himself. He believes he's controlled by external forces, and not in a delusional way. Really? Maybe? I don't, like, technically not delusional, but it's sort of an extreme case. And all of us sometimes make excuses. And usually when we make excuses, we're giving up control, saying, well, that wasn't my fault because the traffic was horrible, or because this or that. Well, I can't change my diet because my husband won't eat that way. You can't tell you how many times I've heard that. Well, where's the locus of control? Outside. And so we do realize, of course, that any one of us doesn't control everything in our environment, but how we respond to our environment is actually in our control. Whether we choose to exercise that or just go with the flow. I guess you could do that in a good way or a bad way. You know what I mean? You know, when somebody says, well, they made me angry. Like, no, they didn't make you angry. You're angry because a chain of things happened, most of which were inside of you. Like, there are external triggers, but then how we react to that is our beliefs and our perceptions and our interpretations. So, one of the interesting things in the research on PTSD, you heard of it before? Post-traumatic stress disorder. There's several variations now, and there's been a ton of research on this over the last 30 to 40 years. And what we see is that this idea of locus of control is a significant factor in the risk of developing PTSD. So when people believe that they have the ability to control the outcome, they're less likely to have PTSD. And that's true regardless of what actually happened. So, for example, women that are assaulted, the ones who fight back versus the ones who don't, the ones who fight back, even if the assault, if they're beaten up or raped or whatever, they have a lower incidence of PTSD, which is kind of interesting. You wouldn't expect that because they go through the same trauma as people who don't feel that they have any control or didn't try to control a situation. So the human mind is a strange thing. So having some sense of, like, I'm going to be in charge of this situation in my mind, and I'm going to address this and find a way to make this come out right, is a healthy adaptation to stress. Okay. So I don't want to go too far down into that, but we'll leave that for you. Optimism versus pessimism. I think I mentioned this already before. We want to develop a sort of a healthy optimism, not a blind, like, oh, everything's fine. Like, the world is a horrible place. Everything's not fine. But there are good people and good things do happen. And so we can have that optimism that says we'll find a way to make it better. Okay? Not the kind of optimism that just says, oh, everything's fine, when it's not really. So those are at least a couple of key things there. Physical habits. Now, we already said that stress is a fight or flight reaction in the body, and that it's designed to get your body ready to run. So guess what? You can run for your life even if you're not running for your life. You know what I mean? Like, you can, if you're stressed out because of life, work, finances, all those things, you can go run and it will actually make you feel better because it helps your body to kind of reset all that stress hormone stuff that's going on in your body. It doesn't have to be a run, but any kind of vigorous physical activity has the effect of lowering our neurochemical stress levels and helping us to feel better. And most of you have experienced that at some point in your life. You have a question?
I experienced that this afternoon.
This afternoon. There you go. First-hand testimony.
Chances of the day, taking people here, taking people there, then other people, and I needed to get some trees painted. And then other people calling and asking some more, and somebody last night who asked me something of me that I really couldn't do. And this afternoon, I was getting so anxious, and I never get anxious. I was almost panicky. And while I was waiting for my sister, I got ready just a few minutes early. And I walked up and down the driveway 6 times, 100 feet one way.
Okay.
And
nice little walk.
you what?
You feel better.
So different.
That's awesome. Yep. And I see this over and over again. In fact, I'm going to say it's probably the most common thing that I see when people show up to me as a doctor saying, hey, doctor, I need help because I have anxiety or depression or both. And I start asking what's happened. I'm going to say at least 80%, probably 90% of the time, they tell me sometime in the last 3 to 6 months that their life situation changed and they stopped exercising.
Well,
Or they don't exercise anyway. But I see it over and over. Well, I got a new job. I have to work longer hours. The kids are in a different school. I have to commute farther, so I don't have time to exercise anymore. But, and 3 months later, they're like, give me some pills, doc. I can't deal with life. Okay. And so I'll just say a quick word on that. So taking medication for depression or anxiety, I view it as a crutch. Okay. And crutches are not wrong. I'm a doctor. I give people crutches all the time. But they hopefully are for short-term use while you're healing up, while you're, got a cast on the broken leg, or you're recovering from surgery, or you're getting physical therapy. And it's the same way with brain neurochemistry issues, with anxiety and depression. Sometimes medication can be helpful as a crutch to help people function while they're in a process of changing other things in their life to help their brain to work better. All right. Sleep habits. So getting enough sleep. Sleep dramatically affects your ability to deal with the stress of the day. And you know this, when you haven't had a good night's sleep and you show up for something, like my wife says, I'm grumpy. Like, it's her way of saying, hey, you're stressed out. You need to take a break, go take a nap, right? So we need to look at how we can manage that. So about 8 hours, 7 to 9 hours for the vast majority of adults is the range to shoot for. And if you're significantly outside of that, then that's a problem. Nutritional support. So omega-3 fatty acids, which the best place to get those are nuts and seeds and leafy greens. Although things like kale don't have a lot of fat in them, the fat that they do have is good, high-quality fatty acids. Yes, question.
And you talking about sleep habit later on your on what serotonin, where melatonin plays a part in that. You also talked about crutches. Would you call
About what?
crutches?
Crutches, yes.
Would you call taking a melatonin supplement?
I think so. Yeah. So, again, I'm not necessarily opposed to that in certain circumstances, but if it's something that a person's doing a long term, you really need to be looking at what's going on that they need to take a supplement for something that should happen naturally. So, yep, sleep habits. Omega-3 fatty acids, I mentioned that. It's not, I mean, that's another place where sometimes I actually recommend people to take flax oil supplements when they're dealing with depression or anxiety, because it boosts that omega-3 fatty acid level, and that's been shown to be very effective. And it's very, it's a natural, almost natural, right? It's just flax oil extract. So again, hopefully that's not something that's necessarily lifelong, but while people are in the midst of, when you're here and you're stuck there because of some things that are out of your control, and maybe you have a plan, but it's going to take a few months to move back over here. Maybe some of the supplements are helpful at that point. Calcium. So the omega-3 fatty acids and the calcium, ideally you get that from your whole foods. But if you're not sure, or maybe part of the problem is if your diet's not all that great and you want a quick fix for it, like that's a place to start. And then you'll see substance abuse is in brackets there. Any kind of substance abuse is actually adding to the stress. Even though people use to try to manage stress, it always makes things worse. So whether that's caffeine or sugar or heroin or methamphetamines, occasionally people get a short-term benefit from that. I've known people that would just use just enough meth so that they could work an extra shift overnight and keep working, and it doesn't end well. Okay. Even though, there seems like there's that short-term benefit sometimes, but in the long run, any kind of addiction just isn't a good solution. Neurochemistry, so we're talking about serotonin levels. We can actually modulate serotonin levels naturally by a couple of things. We've already talked about deep breathing. That was one of the first things we talked about here. That actually can raise your serotonin level naturally by doing that deep breathing exercise. Another is getting a therapy lamp. I don't know if this is a therapy lamp, but it is bright. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you can get therapy lamps that are designed for seasonal affective disorder, depression, and part of how they work, we think, is that bright light stimulates the production of serotonin in the brain and helps to re-regulate the melatonin cycle as well. So those are a couple. Another good way is actually physical exercise. So these things are kind of interlaced. So vigorous physical exercise actually will also increase serotonin levels. Biofeedback. Now, biofeedback is perhaps controversial in some circles. There's different ways of doing biofeedback. A very simple way now, you can go to Walmart and get the little pulse oximeter that goes on your finger, and you can do your deep breathing exercise and relax and see if you can get that heart rate to go down just by relaxing. And it's not that difficult to do. So that's one very simple, inexpensive form of biofeedback. There are all sorts of more involved machines and programs and stuff for that. I don't normally recommend all of those things, but it may be helpful for some people. We're talking about deep breathing, meditation. So there's actually been a lot of research on meditation, and it's kind of a big topic because meditation is not just one thing. There's dozens of different styles and formats for doing meditation, and so it's really hard to take the studies that have been done and draw conclusions because each one is different, and so we have to be careful about that. Also, we want to be careful about it because a lot of the meditation techniques are borrowed from Eastern philosophies And so I don't think that just because something originated in Asia makes it bad, but also if it's closely connected with a philosophy that's not Christian, we have to be really, really careful with that. So I typically will suggest something that's more overtly Christian, if you're going to call it a meditation, which means reading scripture, thinking about the Word of God, or one of the things that I like to do, and I don't really think of it as meditation, although some people call it that, and that is just go sit out in the woods and just watch nature. Where I'm building my house, it overlooks kind of a swampy area, and there's birds galore, and so it's very distracting when I'm trying to build my house, but I want to just sit and look at the birds. And today there were the Canadian geese are gathering up, getting ready for their migration, and the sandhill cranes, and they're so goofy. They have this weird sound they make, and they fly around. They look, I don't know, I think they're really cool, but they just look kind of goofy. And I didn't grow up with sandhill cranes around. I was like, I just want to sit and watch them. Is that a meditation, or is it just watching nature? I don't care. I think it's okay, right? And my wife, a couple of months ago, she sent me a study that she saw somewhere where they said that if you just sit where you can see water and look at the water for 10 minutes, it'll lower your blood pressure. Like, all right, there's water with the birds. I like that. I don't know if that works with the fish tank in your house or not, but
It sure would.
it's worth a try, right? I don't know. So mix data on meditation by doing something where you're being calm and you're focusing on something outside of yourself, whether it be nature or scripture or prayer time. That's helpful for dealing with stress. Classical music and nature sounds. I put nature sounds in quotes because now a lot of people get their nature sounds, off a recording, off of YouTube or whatever, instead of actually being out in nature, which is the best way. But, if you can't make it to the ocean, you could put on the soundtrack of the ocean, and that's calming. There's nothing wrong with that. And classical music. There's so much research on classical music and its effect on the brain. And it's one of those things, like, even if you don't really like it, as long as it doesn't actively make you revolt against it, or maybe you just need help finding the right artist or something. But listening to classical music on a regular basis actually affects brain chemistry. So, all right. So that's the neurochemistry section. Social skills, maintaining friendships. So having friends. Now I know what I'm saying is a little bit challenging, but actually having friendships with real people, not Facebook friends, but like actual people that you can just sit and talk to. I saw something recently that said the greatest miracle of Jesus that nobody talks about, the fact that he was 33 years old and he had 12 friends. Or 11 maybe. Even so, that's pretty amazing, right? So our whole society today is, I want to say designed, although I'm not sure if it's designed as so much as just the way it is, but it's not set up to nurture friendships. It's set up to fracture society, to destroy families, to make friendships artificial. And so having real friends is actually very helpful, because when you're over here and you have a real friend that you can call and talk to, it helps a lot. Doing good to bless others. So volunteering or doing something to help someone else. I read a book a number of years ago about survival, and this guy went through a whole bunch of studies on survival and looked at different things. And one of the things that came out of the research is that in disaster situations, doctors and nurses have a higher survival rate than other people. And they were wondering about that. And so what they figured out is that doctors and nurses, when there's a disaster, they get about saving other people. And in the act of saving other people, they save themselves because they're so focused on taking care of the injured people that they get saved along with them. And I think this can be true in many other situations, not just disaster situations, but getting outside of your own little problems and helping someone else. It helps us, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, helps to give us a different perspective. So, yeah, give some thought to what are you doing to be a blessing to someone else. Next page 6, time and energy management skills. So the first one there is just do it now. Like, if there's something that needs to be done, do it. And often, if you just put it, well, I'm going to have to say this. Sometimes you can put things off, and then if you put it off long enough, then you don't have to do it anymore. So procrastination, like strategic procrastination, that's a real thing. And from years of living over here, I've found that procrastination is sometimes can help you move back over here. Right? Like, hey, I have this list of all these things. My to-do list for the day is about 6 months worth of projects. Like, well, these are not all going to happen today. So just let it go. But so there's kind of I'm saying two things at once. One is the things that you can do right now, do them right now. David Allen, he wrote a couple of best-selling books called Getting Things Done. I don't know if you've heard of it. He's a time management guru. And he says, and this is in the context of business executives and things like that in particular, but for everybody else too. Like, when you're going through your day and something comes up, if you can get it done in 2 minutes, just do it. Don't bother putting it on a to-do list for later, because it's going to spend more time putting it on the list, trying to remember what it was, getting that list out, and then getting the things and finding that email to, like, if it's only going to take 2 minutes, just do it now and get it done and move on. Okay. So, yeah. Learn when your peak performance hours are. So this may be different for different types of projects. For myself, I find, for me, mental focus mid-morning is really good. I think that's true for a lot of people. Late afternoon, for things that require a lot of mental focus, is not prime time. It may be different for you. So figuring out when is your peak performance hours for the things that need to be done, and matching your schedule so that you're doing those most important things in a time slot that is going to be best for you. Then finding a balance between pushing through and taking a break or task switching. So that's a challenge sometimes. Sometimes there's jobs that have to be done and you got to go. Like, so if you're, classic thing, you're chopping a tree with an axe. When do you stop to sharpen the axe? When you need to. Well, I mean, if it's a huge tree, you might have to stop and sharpen the axe several times to really be the most efficient. If it's a little tree and the axe is dull, but you don't know where the whetstone is, like, maybe you just get her done. Sometimes there's some tasks that you can do. I worked construction long enough to know this. There's a lot of things in construction that there's specific tools for that job that make the job faster. But sometimes it's faster to just improvise and do the job with what you have than to stop everything, drive into town, and go and buy that tool, and then, drive back, and you just spent 3 hours finding that tool because it wasn't at the first store. You had to go to the second store. And then by the time, like, if you just spent that first hour improvising and getting it done, you could be done already and on with something else. You understand what I mean? So that happens a lot of times in life. You gotta make that judgment call, push through, get it done, or maybe sometimes you just need to take a break. There are a lot of studies done on this in the business world about break time. This is why people get 15-minute break every 2 hours, because there's good research that says you actually get more efficient work done if you take a break every few hours. So, and then create margin. And I recommend this book by Dr. Richard Swenson, Margin, Restoring Emotional, Physical, Financial, and Time Reserves to Overloaded Lives. And it's the idea of just this, moving back down this curve just a little bit so you have some margin. So when something happens, because something always happens, you have that little extra reserve capacity to deal with life. Okay? Here's a little graphic. I like this one. This is a very important concept. So you can divide things in life into the important and not important, and the urgent and not urgent. So what's something that's not urgent and not important? Worthless. Yeah, like junk mail, right? You get junk mail, do you open it and read it all? No, because that's just wasting time on something that's totally worthless. Just throw it away. Don't even bother opening it. A lot of media these days fits into that category. What's something that is urgent but not important? Something that's urgent but not important. How about telemarketers on a phone? Hello, I'd like to ask you a few questions. We're running a survey. Blah, blah, blah. Like, it's right now. Like, it's urgent. The phone's ringing. Or maybe you answered the phone and now they want to do this survey right now. How important is that? I mean, it might be important to somebody, but it's not important to me. I'm busy right now. Bye. Okay. What's something that's important and urgent? Huh? Exercise. No. Urgent is somebody's bleeding. Right? That's important. That's urgent. Okay. Blood sugar is 45. That's kind of urgent and it's important. Yeah. You got a flat tire. And that needs to be fixed right away. I mean, there's a lot of things that fit into that category. What's something that's not urgent but important? I would say exercise. I don't know. Maybe sometimes exercise is urgent when it gets to that point where, before I strangle somebody, I'm going to have to go for a run. Okay, maybe that's urgent. But usually, this is why people don't exercise, because it's not urgent. So often, people live their life doing the urgent. They're running around putting out fires and, answering telemarketer phone calls and doing all this stuff, and they don't do this. Urgent is it's like a tyranny that takes over our lives. And then we forget that just because it's urgent doesn't mean that it's important. And so the goal is to go from living so much of our time in this urgent but not important to live more and more of our time in the not urgent but important. So what's another thing that's not urgent but important? Well, how about going for a walk with my wife? just having dinner, and relaxing with the family and playing Legos with my kids and reading the Bible. Bible, that's not urgent. The Bible is always there. It's not going anywhere, but it's important. Someday it might.
Schedule.
Yeah.
And if we didn't stop in the not urgent, but important, then we have less urgent and important.
Yeah. So the more you exercise and the more you take time to eat right, then the less likely you're going to have a blood sugar of 45 or a heart attack or a stroke or, all the other urgent things. So the more maintenance we do, the less breakdowns we're going to have. So when you do have a breakdown, like you got to address it, but ultimately, fixing this whole mess over here and moving over here means that somehow we got to start a little bit more and more into that important but not urgent, because those are the things that get pushed off and then eventually something breaks. And when we're talking about our health, that's not good. Okay. Page 7. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about spiritual. And I think all of us here right now are believers. And so none of this should be a surprise to you, but let it be a reminder. Spiritual health can give people a tremendous ability to deal with stress and still remain calm and at peace. I've seen this happen. I've experienced it. Connecting with God and having a higher purpose in life allows us to sort of transcend some of the everyday stresses of life that otherwise might seem overwhelming. And I know there's a lot of people right now, for example, that are so stressed out about the election coming up. And I can't say that I'm really happy about the way that it's shaping up and what's going on in our country. I could be very distressed about it, except for the fact that I know the end of the story. As I've read my Bible, I know there's a time of great trouble, but then the end will come and everything will be set right. Okay? And it's not going to be anybody on the ballot. There's none of the people on the ballot that's going to fix all the problems that we have. Okay? That doesn't mean I don't have my thoughts about who's better or worse, but it means I don't have to get all stressed out about it because I have a higher purpose, a higher connection.
And surrender. Surrender is a big thing there. Learning to surrender everything.
Yeah.
To God.
So here I have 5 steps, and this could be much more complicated. It's fairly basic, but choose to trust God. It's a choice. It's a choice. We talked about choices before, so this is another choice. We can choose to trust God. We can choose to believe that He has a purpose for our life and for our situation. We can believe that God can bring something good out of our challenging situations. So even when we're over here and everything's breaking down and then a hurricane comes along, and like one of my boys is a paramedic, he was just telling me they went to order saline, and apparently one of the big plants where they make normal saline was destroyed in a hurricane. And so now there's a shortage. So, I believe that God can bring something good even out of bad things. And then choose to express gratitude to God for the fact that He is working to bring about something good. And if you, I don't know how to just say this, but you think about all of us in this room have a lot of good things in our lives. There are people, like I had a guy a couple years ago who had just got out of prison, and he had some back pain, and he had a little anxiety. He came in, he wanted to talk about getting a disability because, couldn't get a job and this and that. Money was running out, and he was living with his girlfriend and their kids, and, I just happened that earlier, just before that, I'd seen a video on YouTube. So I pulled out my phone and I showed him the video. It was this race. Have you seen those like Tough Mudder races, like an obstacle course? You haven't seen that? So it's this popular thing now. There's these races, and it's like these obstacle courses, and you have to go through the mud pit and climb over the obstacles, nets, and all sorts of different things. So there's this guy who's a Marine, had both his legs blown off over in Iraq or Afghanistan somewhere. And so he had just his stumps, and he was on the ground, hopping along. He was running this race for fun and like completing the race with no legs. So I showed this video to this guy, and like, this guy's got no legs, and he's out running races for fun. And you're telling me, like, you want to choose to be disabled? Because you could make an argument that you're disabled. If you have back pain, you can't do certain things. But then you spend the rest of your life identifying as a disabled person that can't do anything, and it gets worse and worse and worse the farther you go into that. Or are you going to choose to be a man and say, well, I got a hard time right now, but I'm going to figure something out? And anyway, so we didn't make any decision. Well, he came back to see me a month later, and he's like, Doc, I want to thank you for showing me that video. Like, I decided I'm not going on disability. I bought a chainsaw, and I'm cutting firewood. And so he's like, I can work at my own pace. And, firewood was, I think at that time, like $200 a cord or something. And so he'd spend most of a day getting a truckload of firewood, but he'd come into town and sell it. Makes, like, he's not getting rich, but there's enough to buy groceries for his family and pay the rent, right? And the last I talked to him, he had gotten a job, and his employer was putting him through school to learn to welding, like to be a certified welder. Yeah. And it's just that little choice, like between choosing to be grateful and to think about what can I do with what I have versus, what's wrong with me and why can't I? There's a gentleman by the name of Jocko Willink that probably none of you ever heard of him. He was a Navy SEAL commander, and now he teaches business leadership guru, right? He says, as long as you can say the word good, it means you're still alive, and that's good. Like, if you're dead, then okay, that's not good anymore. But if you're still alive, if you can still breathe enough to say good, then you got something going for you. And I always say, if you're still alive, you have something to express gratitude to God for. If you can form the thought to thank God that anything, then you got something to be thankful for. And then choose to praise God for His goodness. And I put a couple of Bible verses on here for you. This one, 2 Corinthians 4, verses 8 and 9. We are troubled on every side, yet not distressed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. I think of Paul, he went through shipwreck. He was imprisoned and beaten and left for dead. And all of these things happened to him over and over again. And yet he said, we're in despair, not in despair. We're persecuted, but not forsaken. Cast down, but not destroyed. And so he would crawl out of the trash heap and go to the next town to tell them about Jesus. And so we do have a lot to be thankful for. On page 8, I won't read it to you, but this is a little poem. I'll leave you to read that later and ponder on it. And so that's kind of the overview of dealing with stress. And so being proactive, addressing the things, making ourselves better, and actually putting these things into practice will help you on your journey of improving your physical health. And it'll incidentally improve your mental and spiritual health at the same time, because that's the way we are. So I'm going to let you go to your groups now. We will want you to continue. And I'm going to say you should be getting pretty close to being prepared to share your health vision with the group here sometime in the next week or so. Okay? So if you need help with that, you can reach out to your group leader or one another. But that's it from me tonight. And I'll let you guys go with your groups.